Hmm. Hello?
Hey, that looks better.
Hello. Okay. Yeah. All right. So it looks like I got it working. Um,
Yay!
I just need to figure out how to get the YouTube um, live going, and then we should be able
Out
to.
how to
Okay.
get the YouTube um,
Oh, okay.
live going, and
All
then
right.
we
So
should
I'm
be
live right
able
now.
to.
We
Okay.
should be good to start. Apologies for the technical difficulties on my end. Can you hear me okay now?
Yeah, can you hear me? Okay.
All right. Yeah, I can hear you good. All right. Looks like we can start. First of all, thank you for coming on and just for being here. It's an honor to meet you and to talk with you.
Yeah, nice to meet you too. It's nice to
Uh,
meet other fans of Godzilla.
yeah, definitely. Yeah, I have that mug as well. Not on me right now because I'm out from home, but we'll just get this thing started. Um, First of all, let's see. What is it that you do, and how did you come onto the project?
Well, I'm a special makeup effects artist, I guess you could say is my title, and one of my favorite things, and one of the things that I was probably best known for, is my painting designs for characters and creatures. And I had met Patrick Tatopoulos many years ago, and back in 1997, I think it was. Uh, this was after we had done Independence Day uh, together. I was part of his team for that. But then, he says, look, he's got another project, and they're going to remake Godzilla. I thought, wow, that's going to be a great challenge. And so, what Patrick did is that Patrick did some sketches. He's an amazing artist, and he did some really cool sketches that he presented over to Toho as to say that this is what they were thinking of for the look of Godzilla, and of course Roland Emmerich, who directed it. Went through Roland as well, and and that's just kind of how it all got started. And then Jake Garber sculpted a maquette. It was probably maybe about a foot tall, um, and this is a really cool pose. And that was a maquette that was taken over to Toho. So Patrick went over to visit the people over at Toho in Japan, and presented that to them, and they all loved the design. They loved that. The biggest concern was that it strayed away a little bit, or actually quite a bit from the original Godzilla that we all know and love very much. But it was time for something a bit new. So we knew it was going to be a bit of a risk, but it was a risk that needed to be taken. And so Toho really liked the design, and so that's what we went with. And so Patrick took that design and refined it even more, and added more detail and things to it. But in general, it pretty much stayed the same. As I think I sent you a picture of the maquette,
Yeah,
which is in this great book. I don't know. Have you seen this book?
I've seen stuff from that book, but I don't have it myself. Some of my colleagues and friends do.
Yeah, it's a fantastic book, and it just has all the some amazing photos and some great sketches in here. But this I'll show you just really quick. But this is the maquette that I was
Mm-hmm.
talking about. See that
Yeah.
with yeah. So that was the maquette itself. And so and Patrick asked me to paint that up, and of course he took it over and presented to it. And anyway, so we formed a great team together, and a lot of the people were a lot of the crew that had been working with Patrick for quite a few years. I mean, even since they did Stargate way back when. And so I was very lucky to be in, very
Mm.
proud to be part and chosen to be part of this group again. Excuse me. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and so it all got started with how we're gonna create the creature, and also the different scales of it, because she was the mama, of course, and we couldn't do her 1-to-1 scale. That would have been just impossible to do. So we did, I think the scale that we did was like a 1/6 scale puppet, and that was from it was like the whole head, neck, shoulders, and the two front arms and stuff, and part of the back. And that was a huge hydraulic uh,
Yeah.
uh, creature that was, it's in the skin and everything was mounted onto this incredible mechanism. But then we also did some smaller versions of basically a guy in a suit. We had a guy in a suit that played the mama. Then of course we had all the babies as well, and all the babies were people in suits. But then they also did a lot of CG versions of it as well for a lot of the scenes that we couldn't do with a guy in a suit, per se, for where they had to run
Hmm.
really quickly and things like that. But they used the puppets quite a bit for a lot of the close-ups and things, which worked out really well. So it was a great marriage between the two of physical and
Yeah.
digital.
Yeah. And then, how familiar were you with Godzilla beforehand?
Oh, I was a huge fan. Yeah. So I'm a big monster kid. You can see my shirt, famous
Yeah.
monsters. The creatures, my always been one of my favorites. But yeah, I mean, I always, as a kid, I always loved watching, the Godzilla movies, and Rodan, and I think one of my favorite ones was called uh, uh, Attack All Monsters, I think it is, or something like that. But it's so they had all the different creatures in there,
Yeah.
including Godzilla and stuff. Love that one. Yeah, so ever since I was a kid, I was always a huge fan.
Cool. Then, how were you shown the design, and like, what was your initial reaction? Uh,
Yeah, when Patrick first
yeah.
showed me the sketches and stuff, I thought, wow, this looks really cool. And as I mentioned before, it was like, it's quite a bit different from the original design of the Godzilla that we all know and love. But it was, as I said, it was time for a bit of a facelift. So it still had a lot of the characteristics of the original Godzilla, but it was something new and fresh. And so I was pretty excited about it, and I think everybody was.
Mhm.
Everybody working on it, and also, so and my job came in for the color scheme of the creatures and stuff. And at the time, Patrick had one of his pets was actually it was what was it? It wasn't an iguana. It was something like an iguana, but it had this really beautiful colored skin, and it had this almost like a blue pearlescence to it. And I love pearlescence a lot, and so I incorporated a lot of that blue pearlescence into on top of the skin, and so that when the creature moved a bit, you could see this blue tinge kind of roll across the skin, which is really cool.
Mm. And then, speaking to that, how would you yourself describe what the final color scheme was for the creature?
Um, it was a mixture of a lot of different things. Because as a kid, I was always into reptiles and things. I'm originally from Phoenix, Arizona, and so I used to always collect lizards and snakes. And in fact, for many many years, I wanted to be a herpetologist, which is a person who studies reptiles and amphibians. So I already had a great deal of knowledge of a lot of different reptiles and amphibians out there, and really I knew the color schemes on so many different things. And so I think what I do, and this happens a lot when I design color schemes for a lot of creatures, is that in the back of my mind I remember bits and pieces of all these different little critters, and so I incorporate a little bit of everything into the final color scheme. So with Godzilla, it wasn't like she was just based on one creature. It was quite a few different creatures, even with the sculpting and things. I mean, it was, some of it was, crocodilian, and just lots of different types of reptiles that we use for reference.
Mm. And then, like, what discussions were had when you guys were talking about the colors, and what would you use and what would you reference?
Well, the part of it was, as I mentioned, a bit of Patrick's pet lizard for some of the color schemes on there. But some of the other ones were just, as I mentioned, also just with a lot of different lizards and things that I've seen photos of, and just because with the reptiles and amphibians, that there are so many different color patterns out there. So it was a big mix of different things, and so I would try different things and show them to Patrick. And Patrick, was always very helpful, and loved a lot of stuff and gave a lot of great notes until we ended up with what we ended up having. And when it came time to color the babies and stuff, I had hired a friend of mine who's an amazing artist. His name's Steve Wang, who's an incredible sculptor,
Mhm.
director, and painter. and he's always been one of my heroes and idols, but I won't tell him that. And
Yeah.
he was in charge of painting the design of the babies, the heads, and so I kind of let him go with that, and he came up with some really cool ideas for that.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of Steve Wang myself. I actually have the Guyver here with me, which he
Ah,
helped
cool,
direct. And
great stuff.
yeah, pretty cool hearing all of you guys working together on that. And then so when it came to painting, like could you go into like the painting process of sort of what you used, how you used it, and any specifics or anything unique to 98 and how you did it?
Hmm. Well, we had to come up with a paint system that would stick to the material. And first of all, we had to figure out what we were going to make the material out of. We always knew that we were going to use foam latex or foam rubber for the
Mhm.
suits because it was nice and lightweight and very flexible. And we would have it reinforced on the inside of it because even though the foam rubber is fairly strong, if it's under too much tension, it can actually tear. So what we would do is that we had a special kind of a spandex webbing material that was it was like a netting that we would put on the core, and then when we would put the mold together and inject in the foam latex would bond itself to this netting, and it would be on the back side of the skins. So the outside would have all that amazing detail that we sculpted, but the inside would have this mesh in there, which would still allow for a four-way stretch, but it would also just strengthen it to keep it from tearing. Now with the foam rubber, the best kind of paint to use on it was a rubber cement paint, and basically rubber cement is the stuff we use it's used in the art industry of gluing paper together and things like that. But it's a very strong adhesive, but it's been around for a long time, and excuse me, it was actually a place called Don Post Studios back in the probably the late 50s, early 60s. Used it, found that it worked really well for sticking to rubber, latex and foam rubber. And the great thing about this is because the base of it is a rubber, it's very stretchy and it bonds to it very well. And and we can add pigments to it, so we can use a universal pigment to come up with any kind of colors that we want. And it has to be thinned down with it comes with its own thinner, which is some pretty nasty stuff and very very volatile. So we had to be very careful when we painted with it. In fact, when we had our workshop set up, it was in LA. We had like a huge tent outside, and also the movie is very top secret. The look of Godzilla, like nobody was supposed to know what he looked like besides the crew, obviously. So we had security around our workshop 24/7, and we had a big tent that had sides on it so that nobody could see in. But we had really good ventilation in there where we did all the painting with this stuff. And so that was the rubber cement that we used for the painting. And I came up with this technique of I like to do a lot of staining the colors. And so basically, wherever there was I'm going to use him as an example here. Like wherever you see light areas in here, I would dry brush a darker color over the top of it like this, just so it would stay light in here. And in areas where it was reversed, where the skin was dark, then I would put lighter colors on top of that. So it made this really nice kind of cool transition, which was really natural. And that was all using the rubber cement. And then as a final pass, what we would do is that we would mix up the rubber cement and add a blue pearlescent into it and thin it down to a really, really fine wash. And we would slowly and just very carefully spray it all over the whole body and head, everywhere where we had paint. And that would just really kick off a really cool, nice little pearlescent blue color to them. There were other areas where we couldn't use the rubber cement because it was a different materials. For instance, the spikes on her back. Those were all made out of like a fiberglass. And so they were very thin, but they were bolted down to basically her spine down the back, so they would have some sort of movement, but they wouldn't flop around. But because they were fiberglass, we had to use a special kind of automotive paint for those and to get it to stick really well. And then once we were finished with that painting, we would go back over it with a blue pearlescence just to give it that blue tinge to it, which was just absolutely beautiful. And that stuff worked really well where if an area is a darker color, the blue would show up better on it than as if it was a lighter color. And so that's why, I designed the spikes on the back to have, almost like a black tips to them. So that
Mm.
would really kick off that blue kind of color. And I think here I've still got, and then we have the claws and stuff. Hang on, let me grab something.
Mm.
Here's one of the claws.
Oh,
I've still got.
okay, now that's cool.
This has an incredible amount of detail in there. And Gabe Bartalis, who's a very dear friend and very talented sculptor, makeup artist, painter, and director, and everything. We were in charge of sculpting all of these guys, and Gabe did a lot of the painting on these. But and they were all hollow inside here, so it was nice and lightweight. But they went into a little mechanism, and these were the ones for the for the mama's foot. So that's just one of the claws I've still got as a little bit of a trophy. It's left over. And again, for these we had to use. I think we used a lot of the automotive paints, but we also used some acrylics on here. So like in order to get them a lot of the light colors that are inside the cracks and stuff, we would kind of paint the whole thing with a light color and rub it all off so it stayed inside the cracks.
Yeah, very interesting. It's really cool seeing you having one of the claws, because I'm pretty into collecting movie props, and I have a few from the film. I have a piece of skin, like a little nugget of skin from the big animatronic.
Oh yeah.
And it's really cool to see that there's still parts of the making of the film that survive.
Yeah, have you got it there with you?
Not with me right now, because I'm out on vacation. So, but maybe I'll send you some pictures later, because
yeah, I can tell you what part it's from.
Cool.
It might
Oh,
be
I actually tracked down what part it could be from. It's from part of the armpit, like back here.
Okay.
I tracked it down from the person who sold it, where they sold it, and I matched the skin piece that he had to the big animatronic. So, yeah, I'd love to show you, see what you think of it.
Yeah, let me see it. I see you've got Godzilla behind you there.
Oh yeah. Speaking of which, I have this little smaller version of the puppet. Like, how close do you think this matches to the one you worked on?
Yeah, it's not bad. I mean, that's actually about the size of well, not the size, but the whole shape and everything of the 1/6 scale. It was just like that with the back spines and the shoulders and the arms and stuff. So that's pretty cool. But when I first came out here, because I'm in New Zealand now, and so I've been out here for the past 25 years. But when I came out in 1998, we had just finished Godzilla, and it was in the cinemas. And I remember Kentucky Fried Chicken, KFC, who was out here as well, were having a promotion, and they were selling these cups. They were really cool cups, kind of like this, not exactly like this, but bigger ones. But they had the babies, and they had a couple of styles of the babies, and they had the mama as well. I've got those tucked away somewhere.
And so beforehand, you did mention the CGI versions of all the babies and Godzilla herself. How did you guys talk to the digital effects teams, and how the color would transition from the physical models to the CGI models, and how do you think they hold up?
Yeah, I thought they did an amazing job with the CGI. And they would come over to the shop, and they took tons and tons of photographs, reference photographs and and scans of the models themselves, to be able to get the an accurate representation of Godzilla. And they did an amazing job. And I remember the shader writers were, a bit, they were struggling a bit to try to get that blue pearlescent kind of color. I remember hearing about that. And so they were all cursing my name, whoever decided to put blue pearlescent on the thing. But they nailed it. They did a really good job on it. And yeah, I mean, it's a great marriage of practical and digital stuff. So, and there's a lot of scenes where you can't really tell which one's which. Obviously, when she's running down the city and terrorizing it, that's obviously the CG version. but they had miniatures. The miniatures of the city were just unbelievable. I mean, they were huge, and we had a guy, kind of walking in a suit, for some of the shots, but most of it was all CG for that stuff. And we used a lot of the actual puppets and stuff for a lot of the close-ups, just because we had so much detail on them, and the sculptures were absolutely beautiful. We had an amazing crew on that. Jake Garber was in charge of the sculpting team, and we had Jose Fernandez, and the team was just incredible. Tom Flouts, and they did an incredible job of sculpting in all the detail, all the fine scales and things. For the big one, for the Big Mama, for the 1/6 scale, the plan was to always have her milled out, and this was before the time of 3D printing, but milling was a fairly new thing, and so we had her milled out of this really dense urethane foam that was really hard stuff. And so the plan was, we didn't think we were going to really be able to get super fine detail in that. So the plan was to get the basic shape and everything of Godzilla, but then go back in with tools and clay, and smear a really thin layer of clay all over the surface and start sculpting in all that really small detail. But what we found is that we were really surprised that when the pieces came back, and they were these huge, massive blocks of foam, and it would all fit together just like a big puzzle. And but we were just so surprised that, I mean, the forms and everything were great. And then what we did with the foam is we did some tests where we actually carved and scratched into the foam itself to get all the scales and details. And that turned out to be, perfect. It was great. It left a little bit of a texture, which wasn't too bad, actually. It just made it a little bit of a grainy kind of texture to it, which added to the whole realism of it, I think. But that saved us a huge amount of time, because if we would have had to have put clay all over the whole thing, that would have been taken a huge amount of time. Not to say that it couldn't have been done, because they did it on Jurassic Park. Actually, they sculpted the whole T-Rex out of plasticine clay, and that was just a massive job. And I think at the time, I remember hearing stories that they bought out all the clay in California, basically. Back then, we used this stuff called Roma plastilina. And it comes in like these little 2-pound bricks, and they bought it all up. But anyway, so that saved us from having to do that. And but again, the guys, we had a whole huge team of sculpting and all that super fine detail that's in there, which was exciting for me, because it's just it gave me something really cool to paint with, and to be able to see that detail and add more detail onto it with my paint.
Were there any different techniques in terms of painting they had to do with, say, a smaller model versus a large model?
A smaller airbrush. It was when I was painting the maquette, and painting, especially the eyes. I think I mentioned to you that Gabe Bartelis and myself made the eyes. And so I have a few different types of airbrushes that I use for the super fine detail. I use a Iwata, a custom micron that gets super fine hair details, which is amazing. But then obviously for the bigger stuff, I use some bigger guns, and I've got a shot of me somewhere where it was like the biggest thing I'd ever painted was the 1/6 scale of the Mama, and I had kind of a big kind of the kind of spray gun that you'd use for painting cars and stuff. And so I would get my basic, big shapes and everything with that. But then I would still go in with my HPC Iwata airbrush and still go in there and paint in all the super fine details and things.
Very cool. And then you mentioned how you had a big team of sculptors. I had the pleasure of speaking to Lee Joyner, who was one of the sculptors on the team.
Cool. Yeah.
He says hi, by the way.
Cool. I haven't spoken to him in years.
Yeah, but like, what was the environment like working on the behind the scenes sets and the different things you had to do?
Oh, the whole team was amazing. As I said, we just had we had the who's who of the effects industry, working there with all of us. Everything from the animatronics department, headed up by Guy Himber and Fred Folger, and a lot of the other guys. And then we had an incredible mold making team. Russell Seifert, a good friend who's probably one of the best mold makers in the business. and the mold making itself was a true art, and what they had
Mhm.
to create, because the molds were just massive molds, for the 1/6 scale. And Then we had, of course, the foam making department, who fabricated all the foam rubber and stuff. We had these huge, they're called uh, what are they called? They're just big Hobart mixers, and they're used in the industry for mixing large amounts of dough for bread and things like that. But we use them for mixing up the foam latex, and the foam latex usually comes in about 4 to 5 different components that you have to add together, and very carefully. The last part of it is the catalyst that you add to it, which will make it gel. And so once you've added the catalyst to it, you only have a very short amount of time to get it into the injection guns and get it into the molds before it gels. Because once it gels, it kind of it kind of hardens up, but it's not hard like a super hard. It gels, and you can't do anything with it. So you have to get it in the molds before it gels. And then once it's gelled, then it has to be baked in the oven. So that's the other thing. We had to have these massive ovens that would cook this foam latex in these molds. And then we had, like, after that, after the pieces come out of the mold, they have to be seamed, because it's where the two molds come together. There's a seam that goes down the middle, and those had to be cleaned up. And we had an incredible seaming department that would go through and just patch all. And because there was so much detail in there, they had to go through and basically kind of resculpt each little scale that was going down the middle of that seam. And then once everything was seamed, and it went to a department where they were able to stitch the pieces together. And by that time is that when it would come to us in the painting department, where we would start to paint it. Um, but they Yeah, but I mean, the whole vibe there was great. As I said, we had, everybody who's who was there, so it was great to be working with a lot of my heroes. And yeah, every day was a lot of fun. I mean, it's not to say that it wasn't hard. It was very hard, especially to meet some of the deadlines and things. But we all had a great time, and we were all very proud of the work and just the way that it came out.
Mm. And then with everyone working on this project, this movie would turn out to be one of the last ones to have big scale animatronics. How do you feel about that? And what do you think those should come back in style?
Well, it was about the time that CG was getting really good, and ours was Godzilla was a great example of it was good enough that it really held up really well, between our puppets and the CG puppets. And so it was a nice blend. I do miss it when when a lot of shows have just all CG, but not to say that that the CG these days is pretty damn amazing. I work at Weta, so we do some pretty groundbreaking, incredible stuff. But even like back on Jurassic Park, it was cool that they had a lot of practical puppets. Even for the T-Rex and a lot of the other dinosaurs, the raptors and things. They had practical puppets and things, but there's always a limitation what a guy can do in a suit, and everybody knows that. But then there's a limitation of what can be done with CG. So it's a good blend between the two when you can get that worked out, when you get them both working really well.
Mm. And then, like, how do you look back at Godzilla 25 years later? Anything you can take away from it that you do for your work now?
Oh my God, it's been 25 years. Boy, I feel old now. um, I just watched it. I think late last year. It just happened to going through the movies and turned it on, and it was still a lot of fun to watch and see. And it's when you work on a film, you can't. It's really hard to take yourself away from remembering of what it was like to be working on those scenes and on being on set and working with the people and everything. But at the same time, you really see it, and you can really enjoy it and really appreciate it, because when something looks really good, I have a great appreciation because I know how hard it was to make it look that good. But yeah, but I mean, I think after 25 years, I think it still holds up pretty well.
Yeah, definitely. Um, Godzilla 98 was my first film and first Godzilla film, and I've stuck with it. 25, well, no, not for me, like just about 20 years. and it's just been always a thrill ride whenever I watch it. And only now, recently, I've started to talk to the people who worked on the film, and it's been a phenomenal experience hearing the film process and the creation process that went into making that film. And so, like, how do you look back at it in terms of like movies you've worked on, and like how that played into, I guess, the creature feature boom of the 90s?
Yeah, well, it's I mean it's great to have on my resume, to have
Mhm.
worked on something like that because it was it was kind of towards the end of the big creatures, that were going to be, practical puppets, because so much of it now is all done with CG. Um, so yeah, and so it's great talking with people who have the appreciation, have seen it, and he says, "Wow, you worked on that." It's like, wow, you're really old. So, but it's also like, like Independence Day when I worked with Patrick on that. That was an incredible experience to do as well. And again, having, incredible suits and animatronics and things, and of course having CG stuff in there as well. Um, but yeah, it's you kind of miss, the 80s were really the heyday of special makeup effects and for the makeup effects guys and everything. And I was kind of like a late bloomer into that. I think I first moved to LA. When was it? Back in 19 came out here in 98, probably 90, 91, 92, something like that. And anyway, one of the first films that I worked on was Nightmare on Elm Street Part 5, The Dream Child, with Dave Miller, who was the original makeup effects guy that created the look of the original Nightmare on Elm Street, Freddy Krueger. So, and but as I said, the 80s and the early 90s were a great time to be in the business.
Mm. That's good to hear. And then, so it's been 25 years since the film came out. Are you aware of its infamy in the Godzilla 98 community?
Um, Not really. It's an interesting one because I know there are a lot of people that didn't like the film, because for one of it, just the film for itself, but also just with the look of Godzilla, they felt like we had changed him too much from the original Godzilla. But it's like, you never please anybody. Can't please everybody. We kind of had the same problem with. I worked on a movie that David Fincher directed called Alien 3, and I worked with
Mm.
that with my good friends at Amalgamated Dynamics, Alec Gillis and Tom Woodruff. And but that's another one where it's either you love it or you hate it, and I'm
Hmm.
finding more and more that people really loved that version of it. And it was just it's a very different kind of film, but it's still there's some great storytelling and some great effects that we did on that. But going back to Godzilla, I think it's one of those films that just kind of grows on you. And I'm a big fan of Matthew Broderick, and he was a super nice guy. And he came into the shop a couple of times just because he was curious on what we were making. So he would come over, and he was just totally fascinated with the whole process. And also, and a couple of the other actors would come in to look at the stuff. So
Hmm.
yeah, so very, very, very proud to be part of it. And whether you like it or not, don't like it, but at least you can appreciate the amount of work that had gone into it.
Hmm. And I sure as heck loved it. And we're starting to see more and more people 25 years later like come out and say that they did love the film. Some of them watched it later on in life. Some of them loved it from the beginning. Like, what are your
Mm.
thoughts towards the cult status of Godzilla 98 that's growing more and more as days go by?
Yeah, that's very exciting to hear. I didn't realize that. So I mean that's great to hear.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that, when the movie first came out, even before it hit the theaters, they spent I know they spent a lot of money on the advertising and promotion of the film. I remember seeing the big buses, where they would say, you know that her tail is almost as long as this bus, and things like that. But a huge amount of promotion. But as I said, that's very exciting to hear that that Godzilla stays alive. and I think it should be not just our film, but all the other ones that have come out as well. You know.
Hmm. And then you were speaking to the promotion of the film. Having been the one who came up with the color scheme, what was it like seeing the advertisement of something that was being kept hidden and having worked on what this creature looked like?
Yeah, it was exciting for us because for a year, like we couldn't show anybody any photos or anything, and which is why I don't have a huge amount of photos, to be honest, because the studios were so strict about it. We had to be very careful with the photos that we did take. Um, but it was so finally when we got to people got to see it. There were little teasers of it here and there, whether it be on the bus or a close up of the eye or something like that. And That's something else too, to talk about her eye.
Mm-hmm.
I was talking with I had designed a lot of different looks for the eyes and things, and I came up with the idea of for her pupil to have it kind of glowing a little bit. And so I remember running that to Patrick, and he thought, oh, that's kind of interesting. And so we talked to the animatronics guys, and we built a special kind of eye for the pupil. We used a special kind of like a milky white kind of resin that was translucent, but when you put a light behind it, it would still kind of glow a bit. And so yeah, that was pretty neat to see that carried all the way through. Because sometimes you get a crazy idea like that. It's like Godzilla doesn't have glowing eyes like that. You can't do that. But it stuck. It stuck with it.
Yeah, Patrick described it as like having his eyes be like lava, like a creature of
Mm,
fire, he says. And I think that
yeah.
really comes out. It's always been one of my favorite features of this design. And especially when you see the scenes of it, of the animatronic looking, it's really just stunning to see.
Yeah. Gabe and I had a great time making all the eyes, and we had to make so many of them.
Mhm.
We had a special process that we had these. I think I sent you a picture of some of the eyes. The process, we had a thing called, it was just a buck, just a blank shape that had some forms and stuff in it, and then I would spray paint that like a gold color, and then I would airbrush all the detail and lines and things like that. And once that was finished, we would coat it with this clear resin, and then once that cured, we got it and put it into a special silicone mold that was translucent. And then we'd close the whole thing up, and then we'd inject it from the bottom with a pressure pot, inject in the resin, the clear resin, into it, so you could see it start to, you start to see the eye as it started to fill up, and then it would come out the top. That's when you knew that you had a full fill. And then that would set up in a few hours, and then we would demold it, and we'd have this this perfect, super glass smooth copy of the eye, which was really really cool, very exciting.
Sounds cool. And then let's see. One thing I want to ask you about was something that did not make it into the film, and that some people have described from the visual effects teams is there was going to be a scene where Godzilla's skin changed color. Did you have any talks with the people behind it, or anything you know about it? How you would have done that if it made it into the film?
No, really didn't know anything about that, really. I think the first time I ever heard about something like that happening was when they did it in Jurassic Park, which was really cool. And I think in our case, there would have been no way that we could have done it practically, so it would have had to have been a CG thing. But no, I don't remember that ever coming up. So that's new to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, some of the visual effects team mentioned on the commentary that they had the idea of his skin looking like the windows of the buildings. Do you think that's something you would have tried to pull off practically?
I don't know how we could have really done that. Really, I mean, unless we, unless I actually painted the reflections of the glass onto the skin, which would look pretty weird.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, there do exist some storyboards of it, and I plan on covering it soon.
Okay.
Um, because it's just really interesting to see and think about how that could have been done. Um, and then just going on to the next thing, are there any interesting behind the scenes stories about you and the other people working on the film?
Um, it was all just it was so much fun, and it got to be a lot of fun when we actually got to go on set and get the guys in the suit, and to be able to puppeteer them. I think on one of the funnest days that I can remember is when we were puppeteering the big 1/6 puppet, and it was supposed to be used for a scene where she comes down and she grabs like a truck full of fish and she picks it up and lifts it up like that, and it's used in the film for that. So we were puppeteering that, and it was Gabe Bartelis, Jake Garber, Patrick Tatopoulos, and myself. I think I was puppeteering the tongue at the time. But then I remember one time we were, because we also had these tubes in the mouth for Methacel, which is like a food thickener, but it's clear and translucent, but we use it for slime. And I remember one time we were sitting there looking at it, and all of a sudden she was just kept drooling and drooling and drooling. It's like, shut off the slime, shut off the slime. What's going on? It turns out that it wasn't slime. It was one of the hoses, one of the pneumatic hoses. And the pneumatics, because they run oil through all the tubes and stuff, one of them had got a hole in it or something. So it was leaking all this hydraulic fluid all through the skin and everything, which was a nightmare because once something gets soaked in oil, nothing's going to stick to it, and so it was a total nightmare. Luckily, we were able to get through the shots and and clean her up and everything, and it got us through it. But yeah, that was a pretty. It's funny now, but it wasn't funny then.
Yeah, and then were there any particular scenes you shot with that didn't make it into the film that you thought could have worked really well?
We used it a couple times. There was a scene where, besides that one, where Matthew goes up to it, and you remember, and he looks at the eye really closely, and that was our big animatronic head. So that was a perfect time to use that. There were definitely some other shots that I think they could have used it in, but they opted to use the CG stuff instead, which was fine. But yeah, it would have been nice to, because so much work had gone into that thing. I wish they could have used her a bit more.
Yeah, I have that same sentiment. I've seen some shots behind the scenes in like featurettes and stuff, and it does look really well. It sucks that it's in like the old VHS quality. I would love to see it in like fully rendered 4K. But
Yeah.
and then did you get to see like the suits in action, particularly the adult one?
Yeah. It was worn by a gentleman by the name of Kurt. I'm gonna forget his last name now, but Kurt was
Harley.
Kurt Harley. Yes, that's right. Sorry, Kurt. But Kurt was an amazing performer. He was very physical, and it was a very physical job for him to get into that suit, have the leg extensions on, and to be able to hunch over and to be able to move things. But Kurt did an amazing job on that, and so did all the other performers that were in the baby suits and stuff. Being on set and seeing all the babies in the suits in the scenes and everything, it was really, really cool. And we had these giant eggs that we had made by Howard Berger and his team over at K&B Effects. It was Howard and Greg Nicotero. I remember talking with Patrick about with these giant eggs, but we were too busy. There's no way that we could have done them. So I suggested that we use Howard over at K&B Effects. And so we got the designs over to Howard, and they sculpted the pieces, and they cast them all out of a very thin fiberglass. So they can be kind of nice and translucent. And but those things are just really, really cool. And as I said, to see the guys in the baby suits amongst all the eggs and things, it was very cool. I wish I would have had more photos of that stuff.
Yeah, same here, man. Because like I've talked to Lee Joyner and Johnny Psycho, who was one of the mold makers, and they all mentioned how like this project was so secretive, and like there are not really many pictures of much of the practical effects, aside from anything you see in the magazines. Did you happen to have any of the magazines or look at your work that was being shown, and like how it felt to look back at those?
Yeah, yeah. I've still got quite a few of the magazines that came out, so it's I've got that stuff, and it's just pretty nostalgic to look back on it, and just brings back all the memories, and mostly memories of my friends,
Mhm.
who I still keep in touch with quite a bit, and think about those the old Godzilla times. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, a few of me and my friends, we love collecting the magazines and looking through the magazines, and just seeing a lot of the process that went into creating all the effects and seeing your work in action. It's just amazing to see. Um, Speaking back to the practical suit, what did it look like when you saw Kurt Carly maneuvering in the suit, and like, what are some things you can describe about it?
The first time that he was in the suit and moving around, it was like she was alive, Mama Zilla, and
Hmm.
and just looked so cool, and the way that the tail would swing from side to side, and the arms were obviously Kurt's arms, and the legs are Kurt's, but he had these really cool leg extensions on, which would give him kind of like the shape of like a dog's leg kind of thing,
Hmm.
with that extra joint. Um, and then once the head was puppeteered, for her eye blinks and the mouth and the tongue and all that stuff. It was just like she was real.
Hmm.
It was like everybody. Remember that day? Everybody was patting each other on their backs, and it's like congratulations. We did it. Like, let's go shoot this thing now.
Yeah, I would have loved to seen it in action. I would love even more to have a video of that because we have tons of test footage of all the babies and they look amazing. And I wish
Mhm.
we had images of the suit video, seeing how it worked. And then one thing I want to talk to you about is that um, in many of the magazines, it said how the people in the practical effects crews all refer to the Godzilla adult as Mama.
Mhm.
Speaking to all you guys, it's definitely something everyone says. Um, could you talk about like why you describe her as she, her, Mama, and just about how that nickname came to be?
I think it was just because she's the one who laid all the eggs, so
Hmm.
we just always thought of her as a female. But I think she was able to, I can't remember the word, but have kind of both sexes. But
Mm.
but we just always referred to her as Mama Zilla.
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting to see because it's something that is brought up a lot when we discuss Godzilla 98, like online, on Twitter, social media. And I always like to point out that in this magazine and in interviews like this, that, it is described as a female. And some of the other departments I know had nicknames like Fred for the digital version. And then people other call it, they debate still about whether it's he or she when really
All
it's
right.
both, according to the people who made it. But it's always interesting how that's one of the topics that this movie sort of brought on because it was the first time something like that happened.
Hmm.
So like what are your thoughts on like I guess the discourse that happens between like this film and comparing it to others and maybe even other films you yourself worked on?
Um, I don't know really. It's just I think it was the first time that as we talked about earlier, that it was the first time that this kind of Godzilla, kind of went off in a different direction as far as the look and stuff, which was very brave, a very brave thing to do, for Patrick and for Roland and everybody. But it was nice to have her just have a new kind of look, you know. But even in some of the newer Godzilla films, which I really enjoy as well, it was nice to see kind of the old the old look, kind of come back in again. Worked well as well. But yeah, but I think with ours, she'll always have a special place in my heart, just because we spent so much time together, and so much work went into her. But it's not to say that I can't. It would be wrong for me to say that. Oh, I hated the designs on the new ones, because I don't, not at all. I really love some of those designs, And in fact, I even think over at What a Workshop, some of the guys there had done some designs on one of the films. I can't remember which one it was, but yeah, very cool stuff.
How does Godzilla compare to your other work? And are there any other creatures that you did similar or different things on?
Um, well, Godzilla is definitely the one that's probably the biggest film, as far as having the biggest creatures in it. I would have loved to worked on Jurassic Park, but I think while they were doing Jurassic Park, I was doing Alien 3. But it would have been great to do that. Um, then I got to work on King Kong, being out here at Weta Workshop at the time. And I was working with Weta Workshop and with Weta Digital. But the designs for all the dinosaurs and things with that, I mean, at that point, we always knew they were going to be digital. But we did have a couple of props. There was one like in the extended version. It was almost like a giant. It was almost like a giant moa bird or something that we had as a puppet. But anyways, going back to those dinosaurs and stuff, and I designed the color schemes for the dinosaurs, and so you know, I was using a lot of my ideas and things that I did back on Godzilla and used them for the King Kong dinosaurs.
Mm.
As far as the some of the color patterns and things like that.
Okay, very interesting. For King Kong '05,
Yeah,
was
yeah.
it? Cool. Because I also love that movie and love the dinosaurs in that film, so very interesting to learn about. Um, and so, what are some other movies, like when it comes to monster movies, that you think you would want to work on in the future, and how would you go differently about it? What are some other things you'd want to do that you did here?
Well, one of my favorite monsters, I have many, but one of my favorite ones, of course, is the creature from the Black Lagoon. So I've always have been looking forward to somebody doing a remake, and of course, Guillermo del Toro did an amazing one with The Shape of Water, which was a very creature from a lagoon like, because I mean he's a huge fan of the design as well. But he did his kind of his own take on it. It wasn't necessarily a remake of the creature from the Black Lagoon, but the creature itself was very reminiscent of it. But I think it would be fun to work on a remake of that, and it's been a film that's been kicking around for quite a while. But who knows if it'll ever happen?
Mm.
But I would love to be a part of that and design the paint scheme for that. Steve Wang sculpted and designed a paint scheme for the Gill Man that was in Monster Squad. Remember that one?
Yeah.
That was very cool. And that was again, it had a lot of the very reminiscent of the original creature in the Black Lagoon. Um, so yeah, so I think I would love to work on something like that. That'd be great.
Mm. And then when it comes to the '98 Godzilla, um, if you had the chance to, or if they were gonna add another monster to that film, what monster would you want to see, and how would you want to go about that color scheme for that film if he were in the '98 film?
Uh, Probably Ghidra. I'm a big fan of
Mm.
Ghidra. So, which they did do that in one of the latest Godzillas, didn't
Hmm.
they? They had something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I thought that looked pretty damn cool. You know. Um, but as far as like designing the color scheme for it, I think I'd make something where using some bright colors, like some bright reds and things like that. It could be quite cool. I don't know. I have to think about that.
Cool. And that would be just about it in terms of questions I have for you today. It's been a big pleasure talking with you. It was great to meet you and have to share these stories and tidbits from the film. And then personally for me, just a big thank you for the work you did. Really changed my life for the better. And I myself hope to one day be part of your industry, working and just seeing how everything goes down. So thank you for coming on. It's been a big pleasure.
Fantastic. Thanks for having me. It's great to meet you, and thanks everyone for watching.
Mm-hmm.
And keep
And
keeping Godzilla alive.
yeah, and then before we go, is there anything you want to shout out? Any projects or upcoming events?
Oh, it's a little baby Godzilla. No, little Ewok. Um, no, we're just we've been busy, and of course we have the latest uh, Avatar film was out, and it's done
Mhm.
really really well. And yeah, we're just we're busy working on always busy working on stuff. So
Well, great to hear. Can't wait to see your future stuff. And then thank you to the audience who is here today. I'll be back with more interviews, more behind the scenes stuff, and videos. So thank you all for coming. Have a good day or night, and signing off.
take care, guys.
See if I can end this broadcast. How do I end it? This is my first time, so end broadcast. There you go.